Hey there, come closer to the fire, because tonight we are opening a clay tablet that seems too quiet for what it remembers. In the old cities between the rivers, the gods were not always gentle lights in the sky. They were administrators, judges, owners of fields, keepers of ledgers, and in some stories, masters who needed workers. The strange thing is that the workers were once gods too, younger gods with sore shoulders, earth baskets, and a patience that finally broke. And when that divine labor strike ended, something new was shaped from clay and blood. Us. That is the cold image at the center of this story. A servant race born from a crisis in heaven. A pantheon that looked orderly from below, but inside was full of tired hands, secret rivalries, stolen powers, and councils where even gods sounded a little like officials arguing after midnight. If you like these slow descents into ancient records, dark myths, and strange human origins, leave a like and subscribe. It helps keep this small candle lit for the next quiet journey. Now settle in. Let the room dim around the edges. The fire is low, the candle is steady, and the night outside can do what nights do best. Wait. Imagine the tablet first. Not the story printed cleanly in a book. Not a museum label trying to behave, but a piece of clay once soft under a scribe's hand. It was pressed with a reed stylus while the clay still held moisture. Each wedge mark and then it dried. Then centuries passed. Dust covered it. Empires rose over it, argued over it, broke, sunk, and became the kind of silence that archaeologists brush away with careful fingers. If you were standing here with me in a museum gallery, you might notice that the tablet does not look dramatic. It does not glow. It does not warn you. It sits behind glass with the patience of something that knows humans are always late to understanding their own past. But the marks on it carry a world where heaven was organized like a state office, and the gods had ranks, duties, privileges, and problems. At the top of that order stood Anu, the Sky Father. He was high, distant, almost too far above the smoke of offerings and the mud of fields. His authority came from the upper realm, from the cold height where the sky seems to have no ceiling. In the old records from cities such as Nippur and Babylon, Anu appears as the source of divine legitimacy. He does not always rush into human affairs. He does not need to. Some rulers do not need to speak often for everyone to know the room belongs to them. There is something eerie about that kind of power. Not loud, not active every hour, but present in the structure of everything. A seal on a tablet, a name invoked before decisions, a sky so far away that no one can touch it, yet everyone must live beneath it. Beside and beneath him stood the great triad, Anu in the sky, Enlil in wind and earth, and Ea, also called Enki, in the deep waters and wisdom below. Enlil is easier to feel in the body. He is not a distant blue height. He is storm air. He is pressure before rain. He is the wind that moves dust through a temple courtyard and makes a hanging lamp tremble. He held executive power over earthly affairs. and later traditions linked him to kingship, to the granting of rule, to the idea that mortal kings did not simply take power, they received it from above. His temple at Nippur served as a kind of earthly headquarters for the divine order. Picture it in the half-light. Mud brick walls, courtyards swept clean in the morning, priests carrying offerings, account tablets stacked and stored, the smell of grain, beer, oil, wool, incense, and dust, the soft sounds of sandals passing over packed earth. If a decision was imagined to pass through the high gods, Nippur was where that decision felt near enough to weigh on human shoulders. Then there was Enki. I have always found Enki strange in a comforting way. He belongs to water, but not only water you see in the river. He belongs to the hidden water below, the deep fresh source under the earth, the place where life waits before it rises. He is wisdom, cunning, craft, secret knowledge, and more than once in the old stories, he becomes the god who looks at humanity and chooses mercy when other gods choose destruction. That does not make him simple. No god in these stories is simple. Enki can be clever enough to be dangerous, kind enough to be suspect, and wise enough to know that an order without compassion will eventually rot from the inside. He stands inside the divine system, but he does not always obey its harshest decisions. Around these great powers gathered the Anunnaki. The name is often explained as those who came down from heaven to earth, though scholars handle such meanings carefully, because ancient words carry many layers, and modern certainty can sometimes be a noisy guest at a very old table. Still, in the source tradition, the Anunnaki appear as great gods, cosmic judges, administrators, figures who help maintain order across heaven, earth, and the underworld. They are not pictured as harmless ornaments. In legal texts, divine names could witness contracts. In ritual life, gods were approached through proper ranks and procedures. In myth, the Anunnaki could judge, condemn, assign fate, and enforce boundaries. The divine world was not a cloud full of vague kindness. It had courtrooms. Think of that for a moment. A courtroom not built of modern stone, but of mythic depth. No fluorescent light. Thank heaven for small mercies. Only darkness, throne shadows, silent witnesses, and names powerful enough to make the living careful. The gods watched. The gods recorded. The gods expected service. Below the Anunnaki stood the Igigi, the younger gods. The source describes them as a class of lesser deities, numbering 300 in the Babylonian creation epic. They were not nothing. They were divine. Yet their place in the hierarchy was labor. They maintained the physical infrastructure of creation. They worked where the elder gods commanded. They were, in effect, the workforce of the cosmos. That detail changes the mood of the story. We often imagine gods resting on mountains or shining above temples. But here the younger gods dig, carry, maintain, endure. The universe is not self-cleaning. The canals must be opened. The earth must be shaped. The order that the great gods enjoy rests on someone else carrying the basket. and the basket becomes important. In the Atrahasis tradition, the Igigi toil for years beyond patience. They dig riverbeds. They build. They haul earth. They carry loads under divine command until their labor is no longer sacred duty but exhaustion. If you slow the scene down, you can almost hear it. The scrape of a basket against the ground. Wet clay slumping. Breath in the dark. The soft curse of a tired worker, divine or not, is probably similar in every age. There is a quiet sadness in the idea of gods becoming laborers beneath gods. It means hierarchy had entered heaven before it entered human society. It means resentment had a divine ancestry. And when the Igigi finally rebel, the old myths are not just telling a story about lazy servants. The source argues that the rebellion expresses real theological tension over exploitation, duty, and authority. Can power demand endless labor simply because it is power? Can a divine order remain just when those at the bottom are never allowed to rest? These are not small questions. They move like underground water through the whole story. The Igigi rebellion will come fully into view later, with burning work baskets and a night siege around Enlil's temple. But before that revolt, the structure must be felt. The listener must understand what kind of world could produce such a rebellion. It was a world where gods had ranks. Anu at the cold height of legitimacy. Enlil as storm and command. Enki as water and counsel. The Anunnaki as assembly and judges. The Igigi as divine workers bent under cosmic labor. Humans not yet born. Not yet breathing. Not yet complaining about taxes or weather or neighbors, because those pleasures would come later. For now, heaven itself is already burdened. Administrative records from temple centers suggest that Mesopotamian people did not treat divine order as distant fantasy. Temple personnel counted offerings, prepared festivals, recorded supplies, and organized human labor around the assumption that gods had households that needed maintaining. A temple was not only a place of prayer, it was an estate, a divine residence, a system of storage rooms, kitchens, workshops, fields, animals, beer, jars, looms, and workers. To serve a god was practical. Bread had to be baked. Beer had to be brewed. Cloth had to be woven. Music had to be played. Floors had to be swept. Offerings had to arrive on time. The sacred was not floating above mud. It stood ankle deep in it. That is one of the reasons Mesopotamian myth feels so old and so physical. Clay is everywhere. Water is everywhere. Labor is everywhere. Even heaven has administration. The Anunnaki, in this vision, function as cosmic officials. They do not simply bless. They regulate. They judge. They maintain the boundaries between realms. In the underworld stories, their authority becomes especially severe. There is a myth where the goddess Inanna descends below. She passes through gates, and at each gate a piece of her power is removed. Crown, beads, robe, ornaments. Each item taken away until the proud goddess who entered the underworld becomes exposed before the judges. The Anunnaki of the underworld sit in judgment. The place is not fiery in a childish way. It is worse, quiet, dry, ceremonial, final. That image matters because it shows the gods as enforcers of order through humiliation and stripping away. Even a goddess can be reduced when she crosses the wrong boundary. The cosmos has rules, and those rules are not always kind. Yet, the rules are also unstable. That is the part I find most interesting. The system looks rigid, but the stories keep revealing cracks. Enki can defy Enlil. Inanna can challenge the underworld. Younger gods can disturb older gods. Marduk can rise above gods who came before him. Divine offices can shift. Power can be stolen, granted, negotiated, orvom. So perhaps the central secret of these myths is not that gods ruled humans. It is that the gods were never as secure as they wanted humans to believe. In the dimness of our room, that thought should be allowed to breathe. Outside, the night is still. Inside, the clay tablet remains beneath imaginary glass. A few wedge marks, a few broken lines, but behind them is a cosmos that resembles a palace after midnight, where the upper floors are quiet, the lower servants are awake, and somewhere in the corridors, someone has begun to wonder why the masters never carry their own baskets. The old order stands. Anu is far above. Enlil halts command. Enki listens from the deep. The Anunnaki sit as judges. The Igigi bend under work. Nothing has broken yet. But the first crack is already there, thin as a line in drying clay. The first crack in a divine order is rarely loud at the beginning. It begins as a pause before obedience. A look exchanged in a corridor. A smaller god holding a basket a little longer than required, feeling its weight, and perhaps thinking the oldest, dangerous thought in any empire. This does not have to be forever. But before the Igigi burn their baskets, before humans are shaped from clay to take their place, the myths show us that heaven already knew conflict. The gods did not live in perfect agreement. Their world had courts, marriages, rivalries, humiliation, negotiations, old wounds, and very impressive titles, which is often how a household tells you it is not entirely calm. The Anunnaki were judges, and nowhere does that feel colder than in the descent of Inanna. Picture her first above ground. Inanna, later known in related traditions as Ishtar, moves through myth with a dangerous brilliance. She is desire, battle, ambition, beauty, stormy will, and a refusal to stay where others place her. She is not the sort of goddess who sits politely in a corner of heaven while older powers discuss boundaries. If there is a gate, she wants to know what is behind it. If there is a throne, she notices its height. In one of the most haunting stories, she decides to descend into the underworld. The underworld is not a place for casual visits. It is the realm of Ereshkigal, the queen below, a place of dust, stillness, and laws older than comfort. Inanna comes dressed in divine power. Crown, beads, breastplate, robe, measuring rod, ornaments, each sign of authority arranged on her body like a declaration. Then she reaches the gates. At each gate, something is taken. The movement is slow, ritualized, almost unbearable in its calm. A crown removed. A necklace removed. Bright signs of rank taken from her, one by one. The goddess who entered radiant becomes less protected, less adorned, less able to command the room by appearance alone. By the time she stands before the judges below, she has been stripped of the symbols that made heaven recognize her. The Anunnaki of the underworld sit as judges. No shouting is needed. The court is powerful because it is quiet. The decision falls with the weight of stone. Inanna is condemned. In some versions, she is left lifeless, hung in the underworld, a goddess reduced to an object under judgment. That story matters for us because it shows the divine order enforcing itself even against divinity. A goddess can cross a boundary and be punished. Rank does not make one safe everywhere. Power has geography. A crown that shines above may mean nothing below. And still, the story also shows that boundaries can be challenged. Inanna should not have gone down, but she did. Enki, with his deep water wisdom, later helps arrange her return. Even deathly judgment does not remain untouched by cunning. The cosmos has rules, yes, but it also has loopholes, and Enki seems to have kept a small private collection of them. That brings us back to the tension between Enlil and Enki. Enlil stands for command, air, storm, decree, the visible order that holds cities and kings in place. Enki stands for depth, counsel, craft, secret intervention. In the source tradition, Enlil is often the one who insists on punishment when humans become too loud or too independent. Enki is the one who slips a warning through the wall, bends a decision, protects the fragile creature that the official council has decided to erase. This does not make Enki a modern hero in simple clothing. Ancient gods do not fit neatly into our little boxes. And honestly, our boxes would probably not survive a single Mesopotamian storm. But the pattern is clear enough. Divine authority is not unanimous. The gods debate. The gods disagree. The gods can even resist one another. That matters because later, human resistance does not appear in an empty sky. It appears in a world where resistance has already been modeled by gods. Enlil grants kingship. The Sumerian king list says, "Kingship descended from heaven." The phrase is beautiful and heavy. Kingship does not crawl up from mud by itself. It comes down. It is placed among humans as a divine institution. City after city receives it, loathes it, fights over it, watches it move elsewhere. Yet the same king list remembers dynasties rising and falling through conquest, collapse, flood, and political change. That contradiction is important. The ideology says rule comes from heaven. History says rulers fall when other men with weapons arrive at the gate. The two truths sit uncomfortably together. A king may claim divine mandate, but he still needs walls, soldiers, grain, scribes, priests, and a population willing to believe that his rule is more than a successful seizure dressed in sacred language. divine authority must be performed. It must be sung, carved, enacted, repeated in festivals, sealed into law, and fed with ritual. That is why temples mattered so much. A temple was a meeting point between the claim of heaven and the labor of earth. The god was housed there, fed there, praised there. The king could build for the god and then claim the god's approval. Priests could interpret signs. Offerings could move from fields into storerooms, from storerooms into sacred kitchens, from kitchens toward the divine table. The gods, in this system, were powerful, but their power also required recognition. I find that detail unsettling. It means the gods did not simply rule from beyond all need. They were woven into human performance. Their houses needed maintenance. Their festivals needed human voices. Their authority needed ritual repetition, as if even a god might fade when no one remembered how to call him properly. Inanna understood performance too. Her myths repeatedly show her seeking powers, regalia, and recognition. In the story of Inanna and Enki, she obtains divine powers through cleverness, charm, and intoxicated generosity from Enki. These powers, often called the me, represent the arts and structures of civilization, kingship, wisdom, craft, ritual, and more. She brings them to Uruk, expanding the glory of her city. Again, power moves. It can be possessed, transferred, stolen, gifted, carried away by boat, pursued, defended. It is not fixed like a star. It behaves more like a treasure chest that everyone insists belongs to them for excellent theological reasons. This is where the divine world starts to feel almost political. Anu may be distant authority. Enlil may be executive command. Enki may be wisdom under the earth. Inanna may be ambition in motion. Ereshkigal may be the unmoving sovereignty of death. Marduk will soon rise through war. Nergal will gain the underworld through offense, confrontation, and marriage. Anzu will steal the tablets of destiny. Each story repeats the same troubling lesson. Authority is real, but it is contestable. The gods themselves do not always accept their assigned seats. The sacred marriage ritual shows another side of this. In cities such as Uruk and Babylon, ritual could dramatize divine favor through the union of goddess and king, or divine figures represented by human participants. The ceremony affirmed fertility, prosperity, legitimacy, and the renewal of order. Candlelight, perfumi, song, formal speech, garments, and sacred space turned politics into theology. But notice the dependence. The ritual must be done. The king must stand in the proper role. The priestess or ritual representative must perform the sacred part. The community must know what it means. The god's presence is affirmed through human action. It is a beautiful thing and a fragile thing. A ritual can bind a city together. It can also reveal that divine authority needs a stage. If the actors refuse, what happens to the play? That question sleeps beneath the source material. At first, The refusal belongs to the gods. The younger gods refuse to labor. Inanna refuses limits. Enki refuses destructive consensus. Marduk refuses to fight without permanent kingship. Anzu refuses to leave the tablets of destiny in Enlil's possession. Later, humans will learn the same grammar of refusal. The divine bureaucracy is therefore not a peaceful machine. It is a system under pressure. At the top is distance. Beneath distance is command. Beneath command is labor. Around labor is resentment. Around resentment are myths that explain why the order must be obeyed, and also insak that remember how the order was once broken. You can imagine a scribe copying these stories by lamplight, not necessarily thinking that he is preserving subversion. He is doing his work. The clay is damp. The reed is cut. His wrist aches. The temple expects accuracy. Somewhere outside, a donkey complains with the confidence of an animal who knows no theology but has many opinions. The scribe presses signs into clay and writes of gods who also complain. That is the faint humor of history. Even cosmic systems have paperwork. And yet the mood beneath the humor remains dark. Because once the myths admit that gods can rebel, the stability of the heavens changes forever. If Marduk can demand kingship as payment for saving the assembly, then rule can be negotiated under crisis. If Enki can defy a divine decision to save life, then morality can stand against official order. If Inanna can descend and return, then boundaries are dangerous, but not absolute. If the Igigi can refuse their burdens, then labor itself becomes a place where cosmic politics begins. When Babylon rose, Marduk had to rise with it. Theology adjusted to history. Myths were composed, arranged, refined, and recited to explain why the young god of Babylon deserved supremacy over older powers. The source treats this as crucial. Divine hierarchy adapted to changing circumstances. And myths helped make that adaptation feel eternal. But what is made to feel eternal may have been made yesterday by someone with a stylus and a political problem. Some scholars would say this more cautiously, and they would be right to do so. We cannot read these texts as simple newspapers from heaven. Myths are ritual, poetry, theology, politics, memory, and imagination all at once. We cannot be sure where one layer ends and another begins. But the repeated pattern is hard to ignore. Power in these stories must be justified. It must be defended. It must sometimes be seized. The room grows colder here. The clay tablet in our mind seems less like a dead object and more like a sealed witness. It preserves stories in which gods undermined, tricked, resisted, and overthrew other gods. That means the rebellion to come is not an accident outside the system. It is the system's own shadow. The younger gods have watched the elder powers. They have seen fear in councils. They have seen authority retreat before danger. They have seen cleverness overcome brute force. They have seen titles fail unless backed by action. They have seen power move from one hand to another. So when the weight of labor becomes too much, when the baskets cut into divine shoulders, when the canals and temple works stretch across years of obedience. The Igigi do not need to invent rebellion from nothing. The lesson has already been written above them. In the dark before the uprising, one might imagine them gathering quietly near the work ground, where the mud smells wet and old, and the stars look down with their usual lack of helpfulness. A basket lies on its side. Someone has stopped lifting. Someone else listens for footsteps. A decision is not spoken yet, but it is near. Above them, Anu is distant. Enlil still expects order. Enki, perhaps, hears the water moving below. The Anunnaki sit in their ranks. The gods still have names, but the younger gods have learned what every hierarchy fears its workers will learn. The system depends on the ones who carry the weight. And in the silence before revolt, that knowledge is already a kind of fire. Before humans had names, before the first brick dried in the sun, before a priest learned to count offerings on a clay tablet, the old stories say there was water. Not one water, but two. Fresh water, deep and hidden, called Absu. Salt water, vast and ancient, called Tiamat. They were not rivers yet. They were not seas with shores and boats and fishermen. They were the first dark mixture, the beginning before boundaries, before canals, before fields, before the gods had offices and titles and troublesome meetings. The universe was still soft around the edges. It had not yet learned to behave. In that first quiet, Absu and Tiamat existed together. There is a kind of peace in that image, but it is not a warm peace. It is older than comfort. It is the stillness of a house before anyone has been born inside it. No footsteps. No voices. No quarrels about inheritance, which is always a mercy in any family, divine or otherwise. Then the younger gods appeared. They moved. They spoke. They disturbed the ancient waters. Their existence made sound where sound had not been welcome. The old stillness began to ripple. The source tradition tells us that Absu grew weary of their noise. He could not rest. He wanted the silence back. That is one of the first dark patterns in the myth. The old order does not always fear evil. Sometimes it fears movement. It fears growth. It fears children who do not know how to be quiet in the ancestral house. Absu decides that the younger gods must be destroyed. Let that settle softly. The first great threat in this creation story is not chaos attacking order. It is an elder power trying to erase the young so the past can sleep undisturbed. Tiamat, in this early moment, is not yet the monster later imagination remembers. She is the old salt sea, the mother depth, the one who contains more than anyone understands. Some accounts show her resisting the plan, or at least not rushing toward it. The story is already more complicated than a simple war of good and evil. Ancient myths rarely behave like tidy little moral posters. They prefer to sit in the corner with 10 meanings and no apology. Ea, the wise one, learns of abscess and tension. This is Ea in his element. Not merely water, but hidden knowledge. The whisper under the door. The thought that arrives before the danger does. He does not meet Absu with brute strength. He uses wisdom, spell, sleep. He casts the old father into deep stillness. Then Apsu is killed. The word can be left plain. No need to sharpen it. The myth itself is sharp enough. E kills the primordial father and builds his dwelling upon him. The old deep becomes foundation. The conquered power becomes a house. Honestly, that image has always felt unsettling to me. A god does not merely defeat an enemy. He lives on the remains of the defeated. It is mythic architecture, and it says something cold about order. New worlds are often built on what they have silenced. Ea has saved the younger gods, but he has also set a precedent. A younger power may destroy an elder power if the elder becomes a threat. Cunning may overcome ancient force. Rebellion can be justified if authority becomes murderous. The story is not yet about humans, but the grammar of revolt is already being written in divine language. Tiamat remains. For a while, she does not rise in vengeance. That matters. The source emphasizes that her transformation into an enemy comes through escalation, disrespect, accumulated grievance. She is not simply born as chaos. She becomes war. The younger gods, having survived Apsu, grow bolder. They make demands. They show less reverence. They crowd the old order with their noise, ambition, and confidence. One can almost imagine Tiamat listening from the salt dark, feeling the balance shift, feeling the world she knew become smaller around her. Then grief hardens. The sea prepares for battle. This preparation is slow and dreadful. Tiamat does not run into rage like a foolish queen in a play. She builds an army. She creates beings that seem formed from the edge between nature and nightmare. Dragons, horned serpents, lion demons, creatures with venom and scale and breath from the old salt before civilization. They are not only disorder, they are another kind of order, one not approved by the younger gods. That is important. Chaos is often what the winner calls the world before his own laws arrive. Tiamat appoints Kingu, her new consort, as Kumonde. She gives him the tablets of destiny. The tablets of destiny are not ordinary objects. They represent authority over decrees, fate, the power to command what is to be. Whoever holds them holds more than a weapon. He holds legitimacy. He holds the right to make the universe answer. Now, the younger gods are afraid. Anu, high and distant, is asked to face Tiamat. He approaches and withdraws. Enlil too proves unable to answer the crisis. The old titles are still grand, but the moment reveals something that titles often hide. Authority without courage becomes ceremonial furniture. That is a little harsh, perhaps, but the myth seems to agree. The assembly trembles. The gods need a champion. Then Marduk steps forward. He is young, powerful, storm-bright, and politically careful. He does not offer his strength for free. He understands what every ambitious figure in a frightened council understands. Crisis is a doorway. The one who saves the room may ask to own it afterward. Marduk demands supreme authority. He wants permanent kingship over the gods. He wants decrees that cannot be overturned. He wants the power to create and destroy at will. He wants not only to fight the monster, but to reshape the divine government after victory. The gods agree. Desperation makes generous negotiators. The assembly grants him what he asks. This is the moment where divine governance changes. The older pattern of council and rank gives way to monarchy. Marduk does not merely become a warrior. He becomes the future king of the gods because the gods are too frightened to refuse him. Picture the scene in a dim hall beyond the human world. Divine faces lit by a light that has no fire. The tablets of destiny lost to Kingu. Tiamat's army gathering like a storm beyond the edge of ordered space. Anu silent. Enlil checked. Aa watching. Marduk standing in the center, calm enough to bargain while everyone else hears the sea coming. There is something almost human in it. A committee in terror. A champion with terms. A crisis turned into promotion. The gods may be divine, but bureaucracy apparently has very old roots. Marduk arms himself. He takes the winds. He takes lightning. He takes a bow. He prepares a net. The winds become more than weather. They are tools, invisible hands, moving force. Storm becomes strategy. He goes out to meet Tiamat. The battle is not only physical, it is also a debate about legitimacy. Tiamat questions his right to challenge primordial authority. In her voice is the argument of the elder world. Who are you, young god, to rise against the mother sea? Who are you to make war against what came before you? Who are the children to judge the womb that held them? Marduk answers not with ancestry, but with power. That is the pivot of the epic. Right is no longer proven by being first. It is proven by winning. The combat unfolds with terrible calm. Tiamat opens her mouth to swallow him, and Marduk sends the winds inside. The storm fills her. Her vastness becomes vulnerability. The very openness with which she would consume him becomes the place where he enters and defeats her. Then the arrow. Then silence. Again, we do not need to make the death graphic. The myth has already done enough. What matters is what happens after. Marduk splits the body of Tiamat and makes the cosmos from her. One half becomes the heavens. One half becomes the earth. Her eyes become the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates. Her body becomes structure. Mountains, waters, sky, boundaries. The world that humans will later farm, measure, defend, and prey within is made from the conquered sea. Creation here is not gentle. It is arrangement after violence. It is architecture from a defeated body. It is order made out of what order killed. There is a dark poetry in that, and a sadness. The rivers that later nourish Mesopotamia, the fields that grow barley, the canals that carry life, all of them flow in the shadow of Tiamat's transformation. Every farmer drawing water from the rivers lives inside the aftermath of a divine war. Kingu is captured. The tablets of destiny are recovered. The monster army is bound. Bound, not erased. This detail matters for the long story. Marduk does not annihilate every disruptive force. He contains them. He sets them in place. Chaos remains, but under management. The old monsters breathe in chains beneath the new order. That feels very Mesopotamian. The world is not purified of danger. It is administered. Marduk reorganizes everything. He assigns gods their stations. He fixes the calendar. He arranges the heavens. He sets stars in movements. He turns victory into structure. War becomes law. Law becomes time. Time becomes ritual. The divine assembly that once feared Tiamat now praises Marduk. His supremacy is not a natural inheritance from the beginning. It is built out of victory, agreement, and the need for a story that makes the new order look inevitable. Some scholars read this as theology shaped by Babylonian politics, a mythic explanation for why Marduk, god of Babylon, deserved supremacy among older gods. That reading is careful and useful. The epic is not only about heaven. It is also about cities, kings, conquest, and the way power writes itself into sacred memory. But for our sleep-dark story, we can hold the emotional truth of it. The gods taught the universe that authority can be taken. They taught that the elder may fall, that the younger may rise, that order may be born from rebellion, that the council may surrender to the strongest voice when fear enters the room. This lesson will echo. It will echo when Anzu steals the tablets of destiny from Enlil. It will echo when Nergal enters the underworld and power changes there. It will echo when the Igigi burn their baskets. It will echo when humans, made to serve, begin to wonder whether service is the only story clay can carry. For now, the new cosmos is quiet. The salt sea has become sky and earth. The rivers breathe from divine eyes. The monsters are bound. The calendar is fixed. Marduk sits higher than before, and the gods bow to a kingship born in crisis. The world has order, but under that order, if you listen closely, there is still the sound of water moving in the dark. The world has order, but order in these stories is never asleep. It must be guarded. It must be repeated. It must be written again on tablets, sung again in temples, acted again in rituals, and defended when some ambitious being notices the lock on the door. After Marduk defeats Tiamat, the cosmos appears stable, yet the myths keep whispering that stability is only a surface. Beneath it, power can still be stolen. The story of Anzu begins almost like a small domestic detail in heaven. Enlil, Lord of Wind and Command, holds the tablets of destiny. These tablets are the instruments of decree. They hold the authority by which the world answers to divine order. To possess them is to do more than own a sacred object. It is to hold the grammar of fate. Anzu serves near Enlil. He is often imagined as a great bird, lion-headed, storm-winged, fierce enough that even the air around him seems to have claws. He is not the highest god. He is not supposed to rule. He is close to authority, but not the source of it. That closeness is dangerous. A servant near a throne learns the shape of the throne better than someone staring from far below. One day, Enlil bathes. It is a strangely intimate moment for a supreme power. The Lord of Wind is briefly vulnerable. His regalia is set aside. The usual signs of command are not arranged around him. Evenhots, the myth says quietly, have moments when they cannot hold every symbol at once. Anzu sees the opening. He steals the tablets of destiny. The consequences are immediate and frightening. Divine decrees falter. Natural processes freeze. The cosmic order becomes uncertain, as if the universe itself has misplaced its instructions. The theft proves that authority is not only personal. It can be attached to objects, signs, names, tablets, rituals, and whoever controls them at the right moment. That idea will matter later when humans begin to handle sacred images and divine emblems with less fear. For now, the gods are shaken. They search for a champion. Once again, high status does not automatically produce courage. Several gods hesitate. The task is dangerous because Anzu does not merely possess strength. He possesses the tablets. If a warrior fires an arrow, Anzu can command that arrow to return to its materials. Wood to tree, feather to bird, string to sinew. The weapon forgets its shape before it can strike. That detail is almost beautiful and very disturbing. Imagine Ninorta standing beneath the huge shadow of Anzu. He draws the bow. The arrow flies, then unravels in obedience to a stolen command. It is not broken by impact. It is undone by authority. The world remembers what it was before the weapon, and the attack dissolves. Strength is not enough. Ninorta needs strategy. He needs timing. He needs counsel, and in some traditions, Ea provides advice. The defeat of Anzu requires more than force. It requires striking before the stolen authority can speak. The battle becomes a contest between command and speed. Between decree and the narrow gap before decree, Ninorta learns to act inside that gap, and Anzu falls. In some traditions, the rebel is not simply destroyed. The punishment can involve transformation, containment, or a changed role. The source points out that this matters, because not all rebellions receive the same response. Apsu is killed. Tiamat is divided into cosmos. Anzu may become a protective figure in later imagination. Mesopotamian myth does not treat rebellion as one single category. It asks who rebelled, why, what was stolen, what must be restored, and what can be reused. Cosmic order wastes very little. Even danger can be made useful if it can be bound. The same pattern appears elsewhere. Nergal, a god associated with plague and warlike heat, enters the underworld after failing to show proper respect during a divine banquet. The story shifts through offense, summons, confrontation, and eventually a marriage with Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. Through that strange path, Nergal becomes ruler below. Again, power changes, not by peaceful appointment alone, not by neat inheritance. A slight at a banquet becomes a journey into death. A defendant becomes a ruler. The underworld itself, that most fixed of realms, is not immune to negotiation and upheaval. The mythic imagination keeps returning to the same uneasy truth. Divine authority is real, but it is not static. It can be challenged by courage, cunning, theft, desire, marriage, crisis, or the simple fact that a ruler took a bath at the wrong time. I say that gently, but one suspects Enlil was not amused. These stories create a world where no throne is entirely safe. The gods may claim ancient legitimacy, but legitimacy must be defended in moments of danger. Anu may be high, but he can retreat before Tiamat. Enlil may command, but his tablets can be stolen. Ereshkigal may rule death, but Nergal can alter the balance below. Marduk may rise through victory and then dress victory as cosmic order. This is not a universe of serene marble gods. It is a universe of courts after midnight, missing seals, frightened councils, armed champions, and powers that can move from one hand to another. That is the background behind the Igigi. The younger laboring gods do not rebel in a world where rebellion is unthinkable. They rebel in a world where rebellion has been woven into the making of things. The sky itself was arranged after conflict. The rivers flow from a defeated goddess. The tablets of destiny have been stolen and recovered. Underworld rule has shifted. Marduk has proven that a younger power can become supreme if the crisis is large enough. The workers have examples. Now come closer to the mud fields of the divine world. The source follows the Atrahasis epic, where the Igigi are assigned exhausting labor. For years they dig and carry. The text speaks of long toil, of the gods excavating the beds of the Tigris and Euphrates, building temples, preparing the structures that make ordered life possible. Their work is cosmic and practical at once. Imagine them before dawn, not in golden clouds, but in damp earth. The air is cool. The ground is heavy. Baskets wait in rows. A god bends, fills one with clay, lifts it, carries it, empties it, returns. Again, again, again. No hymn makes the load lighter. No title softens the shoulder. The rivers must be shaped. The canals must be opened. Creation, once organized by victory, now has maintenance costs. That is where myths become almost painfully realistic. Every empire loves the monument. Few sing to the workers who carried the brick. For 40 years, the source says, the Igigi labor. We should hear that number as mythic weight rather than ordinary timekeeping. 40 years of baskets. 40 years of orders. 40 years of the upper gods resting while the lower gods carry the world. Then the workers stop. A work stoppage among gods. It sounds almost too modern, but the ancient story knows the feeling. The basket is set down. The back straightens. Silence spreads across the labor ground. One god stops. Then another. The rhythm of obedience breaks. They burn their earth baskets. This is one of the signature images of the whole source. The tools of exploitation become fire. The baskets that carried mud now carry flame. Sparks rise into the night outside Enlil's domain. The smoke curls toward heaven like a complaint that has finally found a visible body. Then they surround Enlil's temple at Nippur. Not in daylight parade. At night, that detail matters. Night gives rebellion a different sound. Sandals in the dark. Low voices. The smell of smoke and damp clay. A temple that had always received offerings now receives a siege. The god of command is surrounded by the gods who have obeyed too long. Enlil is alarmed. He summons Anu and Ea. The crisis is too great to dismiss as laziness. The laborers are essential. If they stop, the infrastructure of creation trembles. The elder gods cannot simply erase them without losing the work that keeps the cosmos functioning. Authority discovers its dependence on those below it. This is the point every hierarchy fears. The assembly debates. Enlil wants punishment. He sees the revolt as an intolerable challenge to order. Anu recognizes that the grievance cannot be ignored. Ye proposes another solution. Replacement workers. Here the story turns toward us. The gods decide to create beings who can carry the labor that the Igigi refuse. Humanity will be made not as a royal dream, not as a tender decoration, not first as poets under the stars, though poets will arrive later and cause their own trouble. Humanity is made as labor relief. The material is clay. Clay from the deep places. Clay that holds water. Clay that remembers riverbanks and footprints. But clay alone is not enough. The new beings need something divine inside them. A spark. A dangerous inheritance. So a god connected with the rebellion, often named Wila in the source tradition, is sacrificed, and his blood and flesh are mixed with the clay. The birth goddess, Ninto, shapes the work. Imagine the chamber. Low flame. Damp clay. The metallic scent of blood. Sacred words spoken slowly. Hands pressing, folding, kneading. The new creature is not purely earth and not purely God. It is mixed. It is service shaped from rebellion. It carries in its body both obedience and the memory of divine revolt. That is why this creation is so haunting. Humans are made to replace rebel gods, but they are made from a rebel god's blood. If that is not asking for future complications, I do not know what is. The first breath enters the clay. Soft. Small. Almost nothing compared with storm gods and sea monsters. Yet that small breath will build cities, write laws, sing laments, feed temples, question kings, seek immortality, and perhaps one day learn the secret weaknesses of the gods. At first, the arrangement works. Humans maintain temples. They farm. They bake bread. They brew beer. They weave cloth. They make music. They bring offerings. They dig canals and tend fields. Temple records from places like Gersu and Drehem show human workers organized into detailed systems of divine service. Bakers, brewers, weavers, musicians, herders, scribes, priests, all moving through daily routines that make myth practical. The gods rest because humans work. A temple becomes a divine household run by mortal hands. The god receives food. The god receives song. The god receives clean garments and fragrant smoke. The fields produce grain. The first fruits are offered. The canals move water. The city grows. From above, perhaps, it looks like order restored. But something has changed. The Igigi rebellion has been solved by creating a new class of servants. Yet the new servants are not empty tools. They think. They remember. They organize. They learn the schedules, the storerooms, the rituals, the divine preferences, the seasons, the ways offerings affect favor. They learn how much the gods need them. A servant who learns the needs of the master is no longer only a servant. The clay is listening, and in the clay, mixed deep with divine blood, the old fire of rebellion has not gone out. It has only become very small, very patient, and very human. The clay is listening. At first, the new beings do what they were made to do. They rise with the light. They move through the temple courts. They carry grain, pour water, sweep floors, tend animals, grind flour, bake bread, brew beer, stretch wool, sing the songs, and place offerings before gods who no longer wish to carry the baskets themselves. In the beginning, the arrangement seems peaceful, not gentle, exactly, but functional. The gods receive what they need. The humans perform what they are told. Smoke rises from altars. Canal water slides through the fields. The city becomes a machine of clay, bread, grain, and prayer. Every morning has a pattern. Every season has a ritual. Every storehouse has a count. A scribe sits in a shaded room and presses marks into clay. So many jars of beer. So many loaves. So many sheep. So much oil. So much wool. The tablet does not sigh, though perhaps the scribe does. Honestly, if clay tablets could complain, the archives of Mesopotamia would be very noisy places. But the tablets remain calm. They record a civilization built around service. Humans feed the gods. Humans maintain the houses of the gods. Humans work the fields that belong to the gods. The temples are not only sacred spaces, they are administrative centers, economic engines, and storerooms of divine expectation. This is where myth and daily life touch. The old story says humans were made to carry the labor of the Igigi. The temple records show human lives organized around that very labor. Bakers, brewers, weavers, herders, musicians, priests, porters, farmers, and scribes, all moving within a system where divine service is not an occasional gesture, but the center of civilization. The gods rest because humans work. For a time, This seems to solve the crisis. The Igigi no longer dig the rivers. The elder gods no longer fear a divine strike at their temple gates. The new workers are mortal, numerous, and easier to replace. They can be born. They can be commanded. They can be counted. That last detail matters. A thing that can be counted can also be managed. Yet the story begins to turn when humans multiply. The source tradition says that humans grow numerous, loud, restless, increasingly independent. The gods complain of noise. At first, that may sound almost comic. The creators of humankind are annoyed that humankind is being too human, like someone lighting a fire and then objecting to the heat. But the complaint is darker than simple sound. Human noise may mean more than voices in the night. It may mean cities expanding, canals spreading, fields widening, bricks drying under the sun, markets filling, families growing, and human concerns becoming louder than divine service. Noise is civilization moving on its own. The gods wanted workers. They received a species. Imagine the land between the rivers as the centuries pass. A settlement becomes a town. A town becomes a city. Walls rise. Ziggurats lift their terraces toward the sky. Boats move along waterways with grain and timber. Children learn trades. Priests learn schedules. Scribes learn numbers. Farmers learn the moods of mud and season. The human world grows denser, more skilled, less dependent on direct instruction. The more humans learn, the harder they are to govern like tools. The source frames this growth as a problem for the gods. Offerings become irregular. Rituals are delayed. Mortals begin to pursue their own needs, their own rivalries, their own ambitions. The servants no longer look only upward. They look sideways at one another. They look outward to land, trade, war, law, and memory. Enlil sees danger. In these traditions, Enlil often appears as the god who cannot bear the disorder of humanity. He hears the noise. He sees the spread. He judges independence as threat. First come measures of restraint, famine, disease, hardship, the pressure of scarcity. These are not described as random misfortunes, but as divine instruments for reducing human growth and forcing dependence. The world becomes a controlled narrowing. Fields fail. Hunger moves quietly through doorways. The noise of cities fades into a thinner sound. People wait for relief. They look toward temples. They ask, what has angered heaven? The gods use suffering as administration. It is a hard thought, and we can hold it softly without making it less dark. But humans endure. Then comes the flood. In Mesopotamian flood traditions, the reason for destruction is not always moral wickedness in the later sense. Often it is functional failure. Humans have become too many, too loud, too independent, too unreliable in service. The worker species is no longer behaving like a worker species. Enlil supports destruction. The divine assembly agrees. And yet, Not all divine hearts are closed in the same way. E or Enki hears the decision and chooses secrecy over obedience. He cannot directly announce rebellion against the council, so he speaks through a wall, through a dream, through a hidden message, depending on the telling. He warns Atrahasis, the wise human, the one whose name means exceedingly wise. This is one of the most important moments in the story. A god betrays the gods to save humanity. The message comes indirectly, as if even mercy must wear a disguise. Tear down the house. Build a boat. Leave possessions. Preserve life. Atrahasis listens. He does not hold a committee, which may be why the plan succeeds. He builds. Imagine the work in darkness. Wood measured. Pitch warmed. Rope pulled tight. Tools passed hand to hand. The smell of bitumen. The anxiety of secrecy. The sky still ordinary above them, which is always the cruel part of disaster. The day before the end can look almost normal. Then the waters come. We do not need to make the flood loud. Let it rise in a softer terror. Rain on roof clay. Water along thresholds. Lamps lifted higher. Reeds bending. Animal sounds close together in the dark belly of the boat. The world outside becoming a single dark surface. The old boundaries disappear. Field, road, courtyard, canal, all swallowed into one moving water. Atrahasis survives. When the flood recedes, he offers sacrifice. The gods gather. This detail is striking. The gods who had chosen destruction now crowd toward the offering because they are hungry for what humans provide. The smoke rises, and divine dependence is revealed. Without humans, who feeds the gods? Without ritual, who maintains their houses? Without mortal hands, who keeps the sacred order functioning in the daily world? The servant race was almost destroyed. The masters immediately need the servants again. There is a quiet irony in that, almost too sharp to touch. After the flood, the relationship changes. The gods do not simply allow humanity to return as before. The source describes new controls: death as a regular limit, disease, infertility, population measures, more complex ritual obligations, and the rise of professional priestly classes. Humanity survives, but under tighter conditions. The flood does not end the conflict. It formalizes it. Humans now know, somewhere deep in cultural memory, that the gods can betray them. The gods know that humans are necessary. Ea knows that divine consensus can be resisted when it becomes cruel. The world after the flood is not innocent. It is negotiated. This is where the tale of Gilgamesh enters like a footstep on sun-baked brick. Gilgamesh is not a quiet servant. He is a king, mighty, restless, excessive. In Uruk, he builds walls and commands labor. The source sees his early tyranny as a human imitation of divine privilege. He acts as though he has the right to take, demand, and dominate because power itself seems to authorize him. The people cry out, The gods do not destroy him directly. They create Enkidu, Arival, a balancing force. At first, Enkidu lives among animals, wild, outside the city, free from its walls and laws. He is nature-shaped as answer to kingship. But when he meets Gilgamesh, the plan changes. They become friends. That friendship is dangerous. Two powerful beings, one king and one wild counterpart, become allies rather than checks on one another. Together they enter the cedar forest. They face Humbaba, the divine guardian. They defeat him. This is a major step. Omens, or near humans, challenge a being placed by divine order to guard a sacred resource, and they succeed. Then comes Ishtar. She desires Gilgamesh. He refuses her. More than refuses, he remembers her history. He names the damaged lovers, the broken fates, the danger of divine attention. His rejection is not panic. It is analysis. He looks at a goddess and says, in effect, I have studied your record, and it is not reassuring. There is a dry humor in that, though perhaps not if one is Ishtar. Humiliated, she calls for the bull of heaven. The bull comes as punishment, a divine weapon against human defiance. It brings terror to Uruk. Gilgamesh and Enkidu fight it together and kill it. Again, humans challenge divine force and survive. But the gods answer in another way. Enkidu must die. His death becomes the wound that opens Gilgamesh. The king who challenged divine powers now faces the one boundary he cannot command: mortality. His friend is gone, and suddenly every wall of Uruk feels too low. Every victory too small. Every royal title like a garment against winter. Gilgamesh begins his search for immortality. He crosses strange lands. He passes terrifying guardians. He reaches the flood survivor, Utnapishtim, the one granted life beyond ordinary human limits. The old flood memory meets the hero who refuses to accept the human condition. Gilgamesh briefly gains knowledge of the plant of youth. He finds it in the deep. He brings it back with a plan not only for himself, but to test it on the old men of Uruk. That detail matters. It shows method, thought, a human approach to divine secrets. He will not simply consume the marvel in haste. He will observe. He will verify. He will bring rejuvenation into the city. Then, while he bathes, a serpent takes the plant. A quiet loss. No battle. No thunder. Just water. A tired body. A moment of lowered guard. And the old human hope slipping away into scales. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk mortal. But he returns knowing. He has tested the edges of divine control. He has learned that the gods can be challenged, that secrets can be reached, that immortality is guarded not because it is unreal, but because it is too dangerous to give away. The walls of Uruk remain. The king walks beside them. The clay remembers the flood. The river remembers the ark. The serpent remembers the plant. And humanity, made to serve, has begun to understand that every boundary has a place where it can be touched. Every boundary has a place where it can be touched. After Gilgamesh, the story becomes less like one hero walking toward death and more like a civilization learning the habits of resistance. The source moves into darker and more debated ground here, so we should step carefully. Some claims are speculative. Some are interpretations of broken tablets, temple layers, altered rituals, and later traditions. We cannot be sure. Ancient evidence is often a room with half the lamps gone out. Still, the pattern is unsettling. Humans were made to serve the gods. Then they learned the gods had needs. They learned that offerings mattered. They learned that rituals had timing. They learned that divine images could be washed, clothed, fed, moved, hidden, damaged, or displayed. They learned the names. They learned the formulas. They learned which god answered which sign, which omen brought fear, which sacrifice pleased, which silence meant danger. Knowledge is a quiet rebellion when it belongs to a servant. At first, human religion looks like service. Bread for the god, beer for the god, music for the god, incense for the god. A priest bows. A scribe records. A king builds. A farmer brings grain from a field that everyone knows belongs, finally, to heaven. But slowly, if the source is followed, the direction of pressure changes. Humans do not only ask, they begin to manage. A ritual that once pleaded for favor becomes a technique for securing response. An offering that once expressed devotion becomes a calculated tool. A divine name, spoken with trembling, becomes a word that can be placed inside a command. The servant learns the master's habits, and then the servant learns leverage. This is what the source calls reverse theology. Not worship as humble service, but ritual systems designed to compel divine cooperation. Prayers become something colder. Incantation, formalists, procedures, names arranged in the correct order, threats hidden inside sacred speech. The idea is not, please help us, but you must act, because we know how to bind the obligation. It is debated how literally we should take this. Scholars would caution that magical texts do not prove a historical war against gods. They can reflect ritual imagination, symbolic control, religious anxiety, or the human desire to make danger manageable. That caution is needed. But for the story, we follow the source into the shadow. Imagine a temple chamber after midnight. The public courtyard is empty. The large doors are closed. Ash lies pale in the offering place. Below or behind the official room, a smaller chamber waits. Its walls are close. The air smells of oil, salt, old smoke, and damp clay. A priest stands there not as a servant bringing a meal, but as a technician of sacred pressure. He knows the name. He knows the sequence. He knows the gesture that must be made before the lamp guttering in the corner. He does not ask the god to come. He calls the god into constraint. This is the frightening inversion. The same ritual world that once kept humans obedient may have taught humans how to handle the divine. Temple archives, according to the source, show gradual changes. Offerings delayed. Ritual quantities reduced. Inferior material substituted. Duties neglected. Priests becoming bolder. At Girsu, the source describes records in which temple personnel demand that Ningirsu demonstrate his power by healing named people, sending rain to specific fields, and defeating named enemies. If the god fails, temple service will end and divine property will pass into human control. That is not ordinary prayer. That is an ultimatum. Picture the tablet being written. The reed stylus presses into clay. The priest dictates calmly, perhaps too calmly. Rain for these fields. Healing for these bodies. Victory over these enemies. A time limit. A consequence. The god is being evaluated by performance. The old order trembles in that moment. If a god must prove usefulness to keep service, then service is no longer unconditional. The servant has become auditor. The divine household is being inspected. The source then turns to lamentations and scattered references, saying that some passages may preserve memories of people seizing sacred emblems, binding gods with rituals, gathering tablets of heaven, and making gods serve at human tables. These claims should remain marked as uncertain. They may be symbolic. They may be later theological distortion. They may be ritual metaphor. But the images are powerful. Humans taking the objects that once mediated divine power. Humans capturing the symbols. Humans reversing the first labor story, making the gods carry baskets like the Igigi of old. There is a dark symmetry there. The gods once created humans to relieve divine labor. In the most radical memory, humans eventually forced gods back into service. The archaeological claims in the source intensify the mood. It describes destruction layers at sacred centers such as Nippur, Babylon, and Girsu as possible evidence of organized attacks on divine authority rather than ordinary war. Temple chambers stripped, cult statues broken, sacred objects removed, sanctuaries polluted with salt water, bitumen, smoke, and deliberate inversion of ritual placement. Again, we must be careful. Archaeology can show destruction. Interpretation asks why. War, political change, looting, ritual closure, iconoclasm, and later disturbance can blur together. We cannot pretend certainty where the evidence is fragmentary. But the source wants us to imagine something specific, not random looters. A planned unmaking. At Nippur, Enlil's sacred chamber is stripped. The cult image is broken. The head is buried beneath the altar. A reversal of honor. Metal inlays are removed. Smoke is made offensive, not fragrant. The dwelling of the god becomes hostile to divine presence. At Girsu, the innermost sanctuary is flooded with water, mixed with salt and bitumen, materials that in the source are said to prevent divine habitation. Think of the smell. Bitter salt, heavy black bitumen, wet stone, sacred floors no longer clean. The place where a god should rest becomes unlivable. This is not only destruction, it is insult shaped as ritual. It says, "You may not dwell here." It says, "Your house is ours now." It says, "The rules can be reversed." The source goes further still. Later temple designs, it claims, show smaller, enclosed chambers, metal rings in walls and floors, drainage systems, hidden rooms for captured objects, and equipment that could be interpreted as binding apparatus. Iron chains and restraints appear in later contexts, sometimes with inscriptions. The story frames these as tools for constraining supernatural beings. This is where the narrative becomes almost claustrophobic. Imagine a chamber beneath a temple, cool and airless. Iron rings fixed into the wall. Lines marked on the floor. Bowls for measured offerings, not generous enough to strengthen a captive, just enough to keep it present. A statue modified, symbols removed, binding elements added. The god no longer enthroned, but held. It may be literal history. It may be ritual imagination. It may be fear made architectural. But either way, it reveals a profound shift in thought. Humans had begun to imagine gods as beings with vulnerabilities. A vulnerable god can be studied. A studied god can be manipulated. A manipulated god can be resisted. Texts of incantation and magical procedure add another layer. Divine names are invoked not only in reverence, but in command. The source mentions traditions of binding the Anunnaki, later fragments, anti-witchcraft rituals, and systems where proper performance creates obligations on supernatural beings. The practitioner does not wait for kindness. He uses technique. Technique is the priestly form of rebellion. Not swords in the courtyard. Not walls collapsing. A quieter weapon. Exact words. Exact timing. Exact materials. A bowl. A thread. A knot. A seal. A flamme. A circle. A command. The hand is steady. The god must answer. If you were standing in that imagined chamber with me, I think the silence would be the worst part. Not screaming. Not thunder. Just the sense that a boundary older than civilization has been crossed, and everyone present is waiting to see whether heaven still has teeth. The source says there were periods of divine silence. Oracles failed. Divination produced unclear responses. Natural phenomena seemed unguided. Temple records became vague. The gods did not speak as before. Perhaps this reflects changes in religious practice. Perhaps it reflects political collapse. Perhaps it reflects scribal tradition trying to explain why the old certainty had faded. In the source story, it means the binding worked, at least for a time. The gods were not dead. They were absent, contained, silent, and silence, when expected from heaven, is its own kind of terror. But the gods adapt. The source portrays divine response not as immediate, simple victory, but as strategy. The gods exploit human divisions. They tempt rebel leaders with power or immortality. They retaliate indirectly through disease, famine, disasters, and economic disruption. They avoid direct confrontation when human binding techniques are strongest. They learn. That is perhaps the darkest idea. Both sides learn. Humans learn divine vulnerabilities. Gods learn human weakness. Rebellion becomes not one battle, but a long contest of intelligence, patience, fear, hunger, and betrayal. Human coalitions are fragile. Cities compete. Priests protect their own knowledge. Kings desire advantage. A movement built to resist heaven can still be broken by jealousy, ambition, and the old human dream of being the one person allowed to sit above everyone else. The gods do not need to defeat all humans at once. They need only divide them. After periods of rebellion, the source describes temples rebuilt larger, more defensive, more controlled. Access to sacred symbols becomes stricter. Ritual schedules grow more demanding. Divination and interpretation become more specialized. The gods return, but not in the same way. Something has been damaged. Trust, perhaps, or proximity. The divine world has learned that humans are not safe servants. Humans have learned that gods are not untouchable masters. The relationship can never return fully to its first shape. The old clay contract has cracked. From this point, the source says, divine presence begins to withdraw, not vanish completely. Not yet, but direct contact becomes less common. The gods speak through signs, omens, dreams, stars, livers, smoke, and trained interpreters. Heaven becomes more distant, more coded, more bureaucratic in a new way. The open voice gives way to the puzzle. The servant has learned too much. The master has stepped back. In the quiet after rebellion, the temple still stands. The lamps still burn. The priests still move through the rooms. Offerings still rise. But something has changed in the air. The god is harder to find. The oracle hesitates. The omen must be studied. The statue looks forward with eyes that may or may not be inhabited. The clay tablet waits under dust. The marks remain. And behind them, if the source is right, lies a memory no official theology wanted to preserve plainly. The memory of humans who were made from clay and divine blood, who fed the gods, learned their needs, took their symbols, tested their silence, and for a while, perhaps, made heaven afraid. After the silence, the temples did not close at once. That may be the strangest part. A god can withdraw, and still the doors are opened at dawn. A voice can fade, and still the priest washes his hands. A presence can become uncertain, and still grain is carried across the courtyard. Beer is poured, incense is lit, and the old songs rise into the rafters as if habit itself might persuade heaven to answer. The source describes a long transformation after the great attempts to bind and control divine power. The gods are not presented as simply defeated. They are wounded, cautious, changed. They no longer stand so plainly in human affairs. They retreat from direct presence and allow distance to become a kind of defense. Imagine Nippur in the morning. The air is pale. Dust lies in the corners of the temple yard. A servant sweeps slowly, moving a thin line of grit from one stone to another. Somewhere, a priest waits for a sign. Once, perhaps, the god was believed to speak through a dream. A clear command, a sudden manifestation, a presence in the statue so real that the whole room felt inhabited. Now the answer comes less directly. A mark in smoke. A strange birth. A shadow at the edge of the moon. A pattern on the liver of a sacrificed animal. The voice has become code. This is one of the great changes in the story. Direct divine speech gives way to interpretation. The gods are still there, in the official imagination, but they must be read rather than heard. Priests become translators of absence. They study signs because the old closeness cannot be trusted. It is a sad profession when you think about it. To spend your life learning the grammar of a silence. Temple records, according to the source, begin to describe divine will through omens and natural phenomena rather than plain commands. Reports become more cautious, more technical, more dependent on trained specialists. The priest no longer simply receives a message. He examines, he compares, he consults lists. He turns uncertainty into procedure. Hepatoscopy becomes one of these arts. A liver is studied like a map. Its lobes, marks, shapes, and oddities become roads through which divine intention might be traced. The liver, warm and strange, is transformed into a tablet of flesh. Thousands of observations are gathered. If the mark appears here, then the god may intend this. If the shape bends there, then danger may come from the west. If a feature is missing or doubled, the future trembles in a particular way. To modern ears, it may sound remote, but listen softly. This is what people do when the world feels dangerous and the highest powers no longer speak plainly. They search for patterns. They make charts. They compare signs. They try to turn fear into knowledge. Astrology grows in the same soil. The sky becomes an archive. Stars are no longer only lights. Planets become messengers. Lunar shadows become warnings. The heavens are watched with mathematical patience. Priests climb, measure, copy, compare. The movement of Venus, the redness of Mars, the bite of an eclipse, the thin horn of a moon, all become letters from powers too distant to visit. I've always found that image haunting. Humans once feared the gods were too near. Then they feared they were too far. So they built systems to read distance. The temple itself changes. The source describes new spaces for divination, observation, symbolic performance, and mediated contact. Instead of a god simply inhabiting a house, the house becomes a machine of interpretation. Chambers for ritual. Platforms for watching the sky. Rooms where signs can be handled by experts. The divine is no longer assumed to arrive. It must be coaxed into legibility. And ordinary people adapt too. When the great gods become distant, the small powers come near. Protective spirits, household guardians, demons to be feared, minor beings to be bargained with, amulets near doors, figures buried under thresholds, small shrines in domestic corners. The world fills with intermediaries because the highest gods no longer answer the everyday knock. Picture a small house at dusk. A mother places a charm near a sleeping child. A father touches a threshold figure before closing the door. A lamp burns near a household shrine. Outside, the city may have grand temples, but inside the house, protection has become intimate, local, almost practical. If the great God is far away, perhaps the little guardian by the door will listen. This is not the end of religion. It is religion after distance. The source also links this shift to magical practice. Incantation multiple. Ritual manuals grow more detailed. Practitioners learn how to compel assistance through correct words, names, and actions. The old humility of petition is mixed with technique. A spell does not wait for generosity. It assumes that reality has handles, and the trained hand can pull them. Again, we should be careful. Magical texts are not simple proof that humans once chained gods in literal rooms. They are evidence of a mind trying to negotiate danger. Yet they also preserve the attitude that divine powers can be pressured, obligated, constrained, or redirected by knowledge. That attitude is part of the source's darker argument. Kingship changes as well. In earlier imagination, a king might claim a more direct divine appointment, a mandate given from above, a throne descending from heaven. But as divine presence becomes less immediate, royal authority requires more ceremony, more interpretation, more staged approval. Coronations become elaborate. Priests read omens. Rituals act out what direct speech no longer provides. The king stands dressed in sacred garments, but the approval around him is increasingly mediated. A procession replaces a voice. A symbol replaces a visitation. A script replaces the living shock of command. This does not make the king weak. It may even make the system more durable. A symbol can be repeated. A ceremony can be controlled. A god who speaks directly might say something inconvenient. A ritual, properly managed, is usually better behaved. There is a dry little truth there, and every bureaucracy in history seems to have discovered it eventually. Law also changes. Written codes claim divine inspiration, yet they function through human institutions. The famous law codes of Mesopotamia do not require a god to descend for every dispute over land, debt, injury, marriage, inheritance, or theft. Human judges apply written rules. Divine authority stands behind the system, but daily judgment moves through human hands. This is another form of withdrawal. The god authorizes from above, but the city runs itself below. In the temple, cult statues also change in meaning. The source suggests a movement from active inhabited images towards symbolic representations surrounded by elaborate care. The statue is still washed, dressed, fed, honored. But the question becomes quieter. Is the god truly present, or is the image a sign of a presence that has moved elsewhere? The uncertainty becomes part of the ritual, A statue with open eyes may still stare into a room that feels empty. Medical practice also adapts. Healing combines practical remedies with incantations. Herbs, bandage, oils, observations of symptoms, and ritual speech work together. If direct divine healing is no longer reliable, practitioners must use both natural skill and supernatural pressure. The sick body becomes another place where humans try to pull help from a reluctant, unseen world. Even death becomes a channel. Funerary rituals grow in importance. Ancestors can mediate. Tombs receive goods. The dead may be nearer to hidden powers than the living. If the gods have withdrawn beyond ordinary reach, perhaps the dead can carry messages across the border. The whole civilization seems to become a system of indirect contact. Signs instead of voices. Omens instead of presence. Intermediaries instead of gods. Texts instead of living command. And the scribes, always the scribes, sit at the center of this transformation. They copy old tablets. They preserve myths of a time when gods walked closer, quarreled louder, punished more directly, and could perhaps be resisted by coordinated human action. Libraries become storehouses of divine memory. Students learn ancient signs so they can read what the present no longer gives freely. Education itself becomes a substitute for revelation. A young scribe bends over clay. His teacher corrects a sign. The room smells of dust and damp earth. Outside, the city continues. Inside, the child copies a name older than kings. Maybe he does not know whether the god behind the name is near, far, bound, sleeping, angry, or only remembered. But he writes it anyway. That is how gods survive distance. Through names, through rituals, through fear, through longing, through the refusal of humans to stop asking the sky to mean something. The source frames this withdrawal as the gods' response to human rebellion. They could no longer risk easy nearness. Too much had been learned. Humans knew divine names, needs, image, schedules, vulnerabilities. The gods adapted by becoming harder to reach. Their authority remained, but at a safer distance, filtered through layers. The open throne became a sealed archive. The command became an omen. The god became a sign. In a strange way, this is also a human victory. Not total victory. The gods are not erased. Their temples remain. Their names remain. Their punishments and blessings remain part of cultural imagination. But humanity has gained space. A little more autonomy. A little more control over law, kingship, medicina, ritual, and knowledge. The servant species is no longer only carrying baskets. It is interpreting heaven. And interpretation is power. Once a human can say what a sign means, that human stands between the god and the city. Once a priest can read a liver. Once an astrologer can read Mars. Once a scribe can read ancient tablets. Once a king can claim divine approval through ceremony, the divine order is no longer simple command from above. It is negotiated through human expertise. The gods may have withdrawn to protect themselves, but withdrawal left the world in human hands. That may be the quiet turning point of the whole story. The first humans were made from clay and divine blood to serve. They fed the gods. Then they learned the gods had appetites. They learned the gods could disagree. They learned divine symbols could be handled. They learned silence could be studied. They learned distance could be interpreted. The old masters stepped back. The old servants kept the keys to the archive. Now, in the candlelight, the image becomes very still. A temple after closing. A statue in the dark. A priest waiting for a sign that does not come in words. A scribe rolling a tablet into storage. A child sleeping beneath an amulet. A king being crowned by ritual rather than a visible god. Stars moving overhead like messages from a power that no longer wishes to enter the room. The divine world has not disappeared. It has become remote. And in that remoteness, later cultures will begin to remember the struggle in different names. Towers, floods, giant, stolen fear, false egos, jealous heavens, and the old fear that humans, when united, might reach too high again. Later cultures remembered the struggle in fragments. Not always clearly. Memory after many centuries becomes like a tablet broken at the edges. A line survives. A name changes. A river becomes a sea. A god becomes an angel. A demon. A giant. A false ruler. A bright thief of fire. A jealous power. A king in the sky. The story remains, but it wears new clothing. The source asks us to look at those later traditions as echoes of something older. The long tension between human beings and powers that claimed the right to rule them. We should move carefully here. These are interpretations, not settled proof. Scholars often read such stories through theology, literature, politics, ritual, and cultural memory. The source takes a darker path, asking whether some myths preserve memories of a real conflict, or at least a deep ancient belief that humans once struggled against oppressive divine authority. The Tower of Babel is one of the clearest echoes in that reading. Picture the plain of Shinar under a hard, bright sky. People speaking one language. Bricks being made. Mud pressed into form. Bitumen shining black in the seams. Hands passing materials upward. A tower rising slowly, terrace by terrace. A human structure reaching toward heaven. In the biblical telling, the people want to make a name for themselves and avoid being scattered. That detail matters. Unity is power. Shared language is power. Coordination is power. A divided humanity can be managed. A united humanity begins to look dangerous. The divine response is not merely irritation. It is concern. The text says that if humans remain united, nothing they plan will be impossible for them. That sentence is astonishing, even when handled within its own theological world. It preserves the fear that collective human effort might reach too far. So language is broken. The project stops. The people scatter. In the source interpretation, Babel is not only a morality tale about pride. It is a memory of divine strategy. The disruption of human coordination before the tower becomes more than a tower. Perhaps it was a ziggurat. Perhaps a ritual machine. Perhaps a symbolic mountain. Perhaps simply a story about cities becoming too united under heaven. We cannot be sure, but the image is powerful. Bricks cooling in the sun. Workers looking at one another and no longer understanding. The rhythm of construction collapsing into confusion. The tower unfinished, not because human hands were weak, but because human speech was divided. There are other fragments. The sons of God and the daughters of men. The Nephilim, giants before the flood. Hybrid beings who trouble the boundary between divine and human. In later readings, these stories become warnings about forbidden mingling, corrupted bloodlines, heavenly rebellion, or powers crossing into human life in ways that threaten order. The flood appears again and again. Sumerian, Akkadian, Hebrew, Greek, Hindu, and many other traditions remember a great water sent because the world has gone wrong, or because humans have grown too numerous, too corrupt, too powerful, too loud, too independent. Often there is disagreement among divine beings. Often one figure helps a chosen human survive. Often the flood ends not in simple destruction, but in a new agreement, a new limit, a new arrangement between heaven and earth. That pattern is hard to ignore. It does not prove one literal event in the simple way people sometimes want. Ancient memory is not a court transcript, but it does show that many cultures imagined a crisis between humans and higher powers, followed by destruction, survival, and renegotiation. The Greek story of Prometheus holds another shard. Prometheus steals fire from the gods and gives it to humans. Fire is not just warmth, it is technology. Cooking, metal, craft, protection. Night made less frightening. Culture itself. Zeus punishes him with terrible endurance, but later traditions turn Prometheus into a culture hero, a benefactor, even a symbol of resistance against divine monopoly. The source sees in this a familiar pattern. A divine or semi-divine figure transfers forbidden capability to humanity. The ruling gods retaliate. The gift remains. Fire, like writing, like ritual knowledge, like the plant of youth in Gilgamesh, changes the relationship between the servant and the master. Hindu traditions speak of conflicts between devas and asuras, powers that are not always simple, good and evil in early layers, but rival divine groups contending over sovereignty, treasures, immortality, and cosmic order. Celtic stories remember the Tuatha De Danann and their battles, followed by withdrawal into hidden realms. Gnostic texts describe archons and a false creator who seeks to keep humanity ignorant, while secret knowledge opens a path of liberation. Each tradition is different. It would be careless to flatten them into one story. But the source hears a repeating note. Higher powers claim control. Omens, or human allies, obtain knowledge. The rulers respond with punishment, division, concealment, or withdrawal. Freedom is tied to memory. The Gnostic echo is especially dark. In some Gnostic texts, the creator of the material world is not the highest truth, but a lesser and arrogant power who keeps humans trapped through ignorance. Liberation comes through gnosis, secret knowledge of what the human being truly is. That is not the same as Sumerian temple religion, but emotionally, it carries a similar wound. The world as prison, the rulers as deceivers, knowledge as escape. You can almost feel the ancient clay beneath it. A being made to serve begins to suspect that service is not its final name. The source also mentions modern ancient astronaut theories. These are controversial and not accepted as mainstream scholarship. Researchers such as Zecharia Sitchin and others have argued that the Anunnaki may represent advanced extraterrestrial visitors rather than gods in a religious sense. Many scholars reject those readings, often because of problems with translation, method, and selective interpretation. Still, the source includes them because they offer one possible framework for why the old texts sometimes describe gods with practical needs, political rivalries, technology-like powers, vulnerability, and eventual withdrawal. If the gods were not purely supernatural, but some kind of advanced beings, then human rebellion becomes less impossible. It becomes political. It becomes historical. It becomes a struggle between unequal intelligences. We do not have to accept that conclusion to understand its appeal. The ancient stories do repeatedly portray gods as needing labor, food, loyalty, housing, symbols, offerings, and legitimacy. They can be deceived. They can disagree. They can be wounded. Their power can be carried in objects. Their authority can be challenged. Whether this reflects theology, politics, extraterrestrial speculation, or mythic memory, it gives the gods a strangely practical texture. They are not always infinite. They are powerful beings inside stories where power has limits. And that returns us to the title question, not as a headline, but as a slow ember in the dark. Did humans kill their gods? The answer in this narrative is not exactly. They did not simply slay them and inherit an empty sky. The old myths do not give us that clean ending. The gods remain in names, rituals, omens, fears, temples, and stories. They do not vanish like smoke from one blown candle. But humans may have wounded them. Humans may have resisted them. Humans may have learned enough to make direct rule dangerous. Humans may have forced the gods into distance. That is the haunting possibility the source leaves behind. The gods were not killed in one battle. They were made remote through a long contest of service, knowledge, rebellion, punishment, adaptation, and memory. The divine masters withdrew, and their former servants filled the world with cities, laws, archives, astronomy, medicina, magic, and questions. What began with clay and blood became civilization. Think of the ark. First, the gods work. Then the younger gods rebel. Then humans are made to work. Then humans multiply. They become loud. They survive the flood. They challenge divine limits through heroes. They learn the rituals. They manage offerings. They test gods. They bind symbols. They endure punishment. The gods withdraw. Humans interpret the silence. Later cultures remember the struggle as towers, Jian, stolen fear, false heavens, secret wisdom, and gods gone underground. It is a dark story, but not only dark. There is human courage in it, even when the claims are uncertain. There is the old refusal to remain only what power says you are. The worker looks at the basket and learns the system depends on the one who carries it. The worshipper looks at the offering and learns the god has hunger. The scribe looks at the divine name and learns that memory itself is a tool. The builder looks at the sky and begins to stack bricks. Of course, the myths also warn us. Resistance can become pride. Knowledge can become coercion. Freedom can become another throne. Gilgamesh himself shows that a human who imitates divine domination is not yet liberated. He is only wearing the master's mask. That is why the ending should be quiet rather than triumphant. Human autonomy, in this story, is not innocent. It is born through fear, suffering, survival, cunning, and many mistakes. The gods were oppressive, perhaps, but humans were not pure. The old myths know this. They do not give anyone clean hands for long. Still, something changes. The servant species becomes a remembering species. The clay that once carried baskets begins to carry writing. The hands that once fed gods begin to build archives. The eyes that once lowered before statues begin to read stars. The mouth that once pleaded begins to name, question, and sometimes command. Now return it one last time to the museum hush. The tablet rests under glass. The room is cool. Your reflection floats faintly above the wedge marks. Somewhere in those signs are gods who demanded service, workers who revolted, humans made from clay, floods sent and survived, towers interrupted, prayers reversed, and a long withdrawal into silence. The tablet does not tell us everything. It cannot. It is broken, and perhaps that is fitting. The past rarely hands us a complete confession. It gives fragments. A line about labor. A myth about waters. A god who warns a human. A king who seeks immortality. A tower halted by broken speech. A ritual that sounds more like a command than a prayer. We sit with the fragments. We do not need to force them into certainty. Let scholars debate the layers. Let archaeologists brush the dust. Let translators argue over signs. Let the night hold what cannot be fully known. For our story, the meaning can remain softer. Perhaps humans did not kill their gods. Perhaps they outgrew being simple servants. Perhaps they learned that every authority, even one wrapped in thunder, has a structure, and every structure has a weakness. Perhaps the oldest myths preserve not only fear of heaven, but the first long dream of freedom. The candle is almost gone now. The fire is low. Ash has softened the red coals. Outside, the dark is wide and patient. The rivers still move somewhere beyond memory. The Tigris and Euphrates breathing through the lands that once fed the temples. The gods, if they are anywhere in this story, are far away now. But the clay remains. The names remain. The questions remain. And we, the children of clay and old rebellion, keep listening. Good night.